How many of you have been to India? Raise your hand. Not so many. Looks like it's going to be a while before we get to go again for those that like to go there. So, a few words about me. I'm Steve Weeber. I know about half of you in the group. I'm a local guy, City High 61 class. Moved away, was gone my whole work career and college and graduate school and everything else. But when I escaped work, I decided to come back here, and I've been back for 20 years out on a farm. Many of you have been to my farm. How many have been to my farm? Yeah, I thought so. And, huh?
What do you farm?
What do I farm? Well, I watch people grow corn and soybeans and raise sheep on my property. So I've got a worker bee for everything in my place. So I'm full line management. I just watch. Anyhow, I traveled a lot when I worked. I worked for a Fortune 500 company out of Chicago, and we were the largest purchasers of airline tickets of any company in the Chicago area out of O'Hare. And I was on the receiving end of a lot of that. So I traveled a lot, especially the last 10 or 15 years of my career internationally. And I remember one time I told Jan, we're going to go down to the luggage store and get some real luggage. She said, what do you mean? I said, well, I need 2 of those Hartmans. So she came back with 2 big Hartmans. And one job I was given was to liaison with our 27 wholly owned subsidiaries around the world. I said, all right, I know how I'm going to learn the international circuit. I'm going to go to each one of these places for a week or 10 days. So I'd pack those 2 bags. I'd go up to O'Hare. I'd be back in a couple of weeks. And I did that for, I think, 2 years. It took me 2 years just to get around the circuit to meet all the company managers, go to all the manufacturing plants, all the research centers and everything else. So I did a lot of traveling. And later in life that came in handy because when I got ready to retire, there were a lot of places that I wanted to go to that I hadn't been to, but many I had been to. And how many of you know Ron Stutzman? Does that ring a bell? And how many of you know John Donaldson, the biochemistry guy? There we go. Those are 2 good friends of mine. And we're getting ready to go to Africa, and Donaldson said, this was after Linda passed away. John said, hey, if you guys going to Africa and you don't mind, I want to tag along. I said, no problem. He and Linda had been in Africa when they were newlyweds in Kenya, when I think the population of Nairobi was like 100,000 people, and it's now 3.5 million. So he was there many years ago and had been back since as a professor. He was in demand all over the world. But John's traveled a lot too, and we were in somewhere, I think in Tanzania, having dinner one night. And John says, well, I hope you figured me out, because what I'm going to do, and with the time I got left, if there's a corner of this world I haven't seen, I'm going to go see it. And I said, well, that's sort of the way it is, since you're never at home and you're always overseas. I said, I figured that out. And I said, the place I always wanted to go was India. I couldn't find anybody to go with me. John says, I'll go with you. When do you want to go? He'll pack his bags tomorrow and go get on an airplane. So John and I planned this trip to India, and I was having lunch with Ron Stutzman, and Ron's always saying, what are you up to? What are you up to? Where are you going? What's going on? I said, well, I'm going to India. He said, well, what are you going to India for? I said, well, I'm going over there to the camel market. And Ron, being a livestock ag guy, camel market. Never heard of such a thing. What's that all about? I said, well, these Indian guys on the edge of the desert come in about once a year on the lunar calendar to a little town called Pushkar, and in that town, 4 Hindu gods descend out of the sky and go into the lake, and there's 35 temples in town, and 400,000 people show up for the fair. There's a fair and a camel market, trading market, and so these guys show up. They'll bring anywhere from 1 or 2 camels to 20 camels, and they trade camels. Ron says, oh, I always want to do that. He said, I always want to know about ag in India. So I said, well, this may be your chance. Sign me up. So The best part of that, I was talking earlier about international travel and trying to do it out of the Midwest. And I remember going down to the Hills Bank once I decided we had to forward some money over to India. And they looked at me with this blank look on their face. It's going to take a while, you know. And I can't remember the gal that held me down there. She's really nice. And we went back and forth. And I had checked this guy out who was going to be our guide, Nick. You'll see pictures of him. And she said, "Oh my God, I'm so glad, Steve, that you held my hand while we went through it, because it took 3 trips to the bank and about 3 weeks to get this transfer to Nick." She said, "If I'd done that to Ron Stutzman, he'd probably had me fired." She said, but at any rate, that's the trip. So it's Ron Stutzman, John Donaldson, and myself, better referred to as I'm talking, is the ag guy, the professor, and the businessman. That's me on our way to India. So for those that haven't been there, the way you get to India, if you travel in a civilized mode, you fly to O'Hare, you get on a plane, you fly direct to Delhi. It's 16 and a half hours over and 14 hours back and change, plus or minus. So you don't want to be in a hurry when you're going to Delhi. And so that's how you get there. And where we were going was to the state. There's a country of India, state of Rajasthan. Rajasthan is out on the eastern northeast border with Pakistan. And this camel fair draws people primarily, I'd say, inside the border about 100 miles in the direction of that R is where we were actually going in the state of Rajasthan. There's a state map which is not very helpful, but to make a long story short, there's Delhi, and Pushkar's out over about here, Ajmer, and that is about, if memory serves me correct, 4.5 hours by train. And when you get to Delhi, the first thing you notice that just jumps out at you, if you haven't been to India, is the number of people there. It's like, my goodness. I've been to China, and I've been to Hong Kong, where they're elbow to elbow, but India is something else. So U.S. land mass is the second from the bottom circle. And that's how much land we have and how many people we have. And when you get down to India, they got a lot less land, a lot more people. And I tell people, you know, if you were walking down the street in Iowa City and you visualize in your mind how many people you're going to run into, multiply that by 10 or 20, that's India. I mean, you're going to run into a lot of people, not a few people on each block. They're everywhere. This was our luxury quarters. and we got off the train after 4 hours, and then we traveled by a small bus and so forth, and we end up at this place called the Seventh Heaven, which is absolute favorite place that I've ever stayed in India. And it's got a really good restaurant up on the top floor. And there's John Donaldson, the professor, as I call him. And the first thing Ron Stutzman asked when he got there, he says, "Why do you have to step over this stupid step to get into the hotel? It seems awfully clumsy to me." I said, "Well, if you want the hogs from the streets out there and you're with us, I guess you just open the door and let them in." "Oh, okay," he says. So there's always a reason for everything. Have any of you saw the movie The Magnificent Marigold Hotel? Yeah, okay, well, believe me, there's a little bit of that hotel in every hotel in India. I mean, they're not as bad as the Marigold, but things don't always work right. There's power outages, there's little problems here and there. But this was a hotel, complete with pigeons and the whole 9 yards. You know, if you like wildlife, why, you're right in business. There's Ron Stutzman up on the second floor. Everything, you no elevators, but cool place. Security system. You got one key and you lock your door. The rooms were really nice and they were quite comfortable. Here I am reading the newspaper and this is waiting to go in the restaurant, which is up on the top floor. I talked to a guy that I got a reference from for our Indian guide, and oh, he was telling me all the horrible things. He had me prepared for pure hell the whole trip. And I got over there and found it to be pure heaven because he was talking about the food and the curry, and I didn't run into any of that. These people in Rajasthan are basically vegetarians, and grain and cereal people have some of the best breakfast in the world. I said, well, Ron, there you go. There's ag. It's now 1953 in the great land of India, which is about where they were. This is a 1953 Massey Ferguson tractor, and it was one of the main tractors you saw throughout India. And these carts that they pull around, they do everything from bricks to cane to people to manufacturing goods and everything else. And these guys are out on their quote-unquote freeways, right in there with buses and cars and tractors and camels and the darndest menagerie you've ever seen going down. If you took the interstate from Mount Pleasant to Iowa City, about an hour. If you do that in India, it's 4.5 hours. And that's because you got to get around these guys and the motorcycle guys and the bus guys and the guys driving camels. It's quite a place. Guard your food when you're in town. This guy will have your banana in 2 seconds. So here we are, Ron and myself and John. Here was the event, the Camel Fair. And it's held on this lunar calendar, and there's a lot of stuff goes on. Every outdoor photographer in the world, and there aren't a lot of them, knows about Pushkar. And they know about Pushkar because of the religious holiday, the costumes, the way the men and women are dressed. It's quintessential vintage country India, as contrasted with Delhi and a lot of places we hear about that are not so pleasant. This was Donaldson's idea. He said, look, Steve, let's go out and capture some images of these guys coming into town with their camels. So we did, and without John, we probably would have missed all this. We were more focused in town. And so here's a guy with a couple camels. Here's a guy with 30 camels. John won second prize at the state fair with this photograph. He and I were sitting on a sand dune right next to one another as these camels were approaching us, and got virtually all the same pictures. But the images of India are really interesting. Here's a guy with 3. You notice they're shackled, and when they bring the herds in, they have 20 or 30 herds in an area, no fencing, no nothing. So they have to tie all these camels up. They don't want to running around breeding their neighbor's herd or something. So they're all shackled at the show. Here's a pregnant lady with a couple of semi-dressed up camels. There's another guy coming to town. Another guy coming to town. Another guy coming to town. Always like to look at the shoes. The camel's feet are funny too. They're made to go on sand. They just sort of are a very soft foot that's made to deal with the sand. So the photographs that you see are a combination of John's and John's and mine. Not so much Ron. Ron's not a photographer, and he's a funny guy to it. So John and I we're taking all these pictures. Ron would be over taking a picture of some electrical box, and John says, Ron takes pictures of things I just wouldn't think of taking pictures of. And I said, he went on, because you go over to Indian electrical box in town, you got all these wires running around, poles leaning over and everything else, and they ripped all the fuses out of these things and hardwired them. He said, boy, our electricians can learn a few things from these boys. Look at this, He was forever doing that on the trip, and we just got a great chuckle out of it. Here's another thing. See the guy with the sticks? All the guys coming into town had sticks. They have sticks on their head. They'd be carrying sticks. And Ron, I said, Nick, what do they do with these sticks? He said, that's what they cook dinner. So anytime they're out, coming in from the desert, they find sticks, they bring them with them. So here's a motley crew. That's Nick on the right, Donaldson, Ron, and myself. Getting ready to, I know what we're doing. We're getting ready for sundown shoot camels, and I tell stories about that. So this particular shot, we're all laying on our side in the sand amongst a bunch of thorny bushes. I don't know what kind of bushes they were. I turned once, he said, what? I said, Nick, what do you got us into? He says, be quiet, we gotta wait till the sun's down. Wait a minute, this bunch of camels is coming. And this guy, Nick, he knew how to get pictures. And so he would take us guys, and we were doing things that we normally wouldn't do, like sitting in the sand, laying in the sand, on our belly in the sand, on our side in the sand. But if you want to get this kind of picture, you got to be miserable to get it, is basically how it works. This is very typical street scene at the camel fair. And it starts here. I remember asking Nick, I said, Nick, what do you wear when you go to the camel market? He said, doesn't make any difference. I said, well, I travel a lot overseas. I'm not looking to stand out, so you got any tips? He said, hell, half the people there are travelers, they don't pay any attention to you. So anyway, we dressed down, but here's a couple of European guys with their cameras and rigs, contrasted against some nicely dressed Indian ladies. Here's the hotel for most of the camel herders. They pulled these wagons, and it was so fun being with Ron and John. And John say, Ron, what on earth are those? Ron says, they're airplane tires. John says, how do you know that, John? Well, in the ag business, you learn about these things. They spread out weight, and they're used airplane tires. So you're going to see a lot of this at the fair, shackled camels and guys standing around, and you can't understand what they're saying, but you know what they're doing by watching, wheeling and dealing is wheeling and dealing. In any country you go into, it's just different language, different things, and they come around, look at these camels, and John's also a big, Linda, his wife, was a birder, and John's a big bird photographer, amongst other things, so you wouldn't miss a bird. But these are the kind of scenes that you see throughout India that you don't see them anywhere else in the world. Look at the painting on the back of that truck. This is in Pushkar now, and there, Ron, is your ag 1953 style. You got the bundles on the wagon. They're hauling stuff in for the feed the camels at the camel fair. A lot of families finance their trip by bringing their cart to town with their camel and contracting people to ride around the fair. And so you'll see a lot of families like this hawking for people to ride. The street scenes were really quite fascinating to me. This is a health food guy. This is a non-health food guy. Somebody asked me once, they said, did you eat any of that stuff? And I said, heavens, no. We ate at the hotel, and Nick tried to get us to eat at some other places, and everything worked fine at the hotel. We didn't have any problems, so we kept eating at the hotel because you don't want to get ahead of yourself in your adventure in India. So street scenes, they take very good care of their camels. They put a mat down, and this is some, I wish I could remember the name of it, but it's a fibrous stock that's grown all over India, and they transport it, and then they chop it up and feed it to the camels. Being a fair, there's a midway and the whole 9 yards, just like the U.S. fair, but they also had balloon rides. And you can see the fairgrounds in the back, the merry-go-rounds. Temple up the top of the hill, one of the 35 temples. And they're always messing with the camels, doing something to them. And whatever they're doing to them, the camels aren't very happy about it. So, you know, these camels are either getting haircuts or getting their noses pierced, or something done to them that they're not happy with. This sort of captures a push car. See up in the right, that's a typical scene, army of Japanese people with cameras in their hands. You see lots of that. So I'm going to zip us through these slides. If anybody wants to ask questions anytime, holler. If you want to wait, that's fine. Swastikas, most people don't know that's an Indian thing. Everybody thinks because of the Germans and Nazis, but the swastika started in India, and it was some symbol of peace or something that.
How big a city is Pushkar?
About 30,000. It's small town. Most of the times in India, when you're going through a small town, it's 1 million or 2 or 3 million, literally. It's a very small town. So here's some people starting to dress camels up. Get ready for the fair. These, I'm sure, if you've been to Africa, and that's one of my favorite places to travel to is Africa. You see these on giraffes and buffalo and rhinos, and elephants. India, they're on camels mostly. Every fair has to have dignitaries. So here's the local dignitaries. Here's the family again. They also had a horse division. And if you wanted to buy any jewelry for your camel, why this is, you know, they fix you up. And you'll see as they get into you're going to see camel competition, camel dancing competition, Arabian horse dancing competition, and mustache competition. Those are 3 of in the opening ceremonies. This is one of my favorite shots because 10-year-old boys are the same all over the world. They do not want their pictures taken. You know, the rest of the family did, and this boy, he was just, I said, well, that'd be a family member that I've photographed 100 of. It's always a little guy. So I got him looking the other way. Here's a guy making jewelry for the camels. Here's a guy. What's that?
What are those red things on your nose?
Decoration.
And how they attach?
Well, various ways. See, there's a little stick through his nose. So at some point in the camel's life, they take this stick and they run it under the skin, right across his nose. It's out both sides. That's what they tie the rope on when they lead a camel, you know. Very effective and very cheap, you know. They get the old camel's attention real fast. But this one, that thing is just, it's snapped across his lead. That's a stick buried in his nose. This guy was, I called him the Grand Dragon. He was like the race car Nassau king. Every year he wins the competition. And so this is the day of the camel dancing competition. So they dress them all up, and you see some of the darndest things. I've done this show a lot in Kelowna, and I say, you don't see that in Kelowna, Iowa, do you? No. But it's quite a spectacular thing to see. So we get there. For those that know Ron is sort of a type A guy, I would say, and used to being organized and all that. So we get there early. We want a prime seat for this camel dancing thing. So we get there and sit down, and these guys put all these stakes up there. They're setting all these stakes up. And Ron is like he got washed over with a wave of Indians. Once the activity started, they climbed right over his shoulders and jumped in front of him. And he started yelling, you know. He was really getting mad. John and I started laughing because, you know, hey, this is not Hills, Iowa. This is wherever we are in India. And these people beat a different drum than we do. See, we couldn't hardly see anything. There's Nick. He's the bald head on the left there, right on the other side of the camera. He's just like the rest of the Indians. He jumps over everybody too and goes in the ring. Then the police come and they beat him back with a stick, you know, until they go back again. Then they come back in again. Then they beat him back again. And Ron says, you know, he's yelling, "You people should have come early if you want a good seat," and so forth. He would just sort of, so what Ron did, he had such a hard time seeing, he went and rented a camel so he could get up on the camel. And I said, that's not a bad idea. So I went and rented a camel so I could get up and take some pictures because these people were just washed us over. And yeah, they're revenuing all over. So here's some guy revenuing. I took my picture with him. This was a hard picture to get because I tried to get a number of camel owners to do that. And finally, Nick explained to me, a guy was saying, "What does he want?" And he went back and forth. He says, "You know, a camel can bite your ear off." He says, "That's why nobody's anxious to do that." But this guy apparently had a good enough relationship with his camel that he didn't have any problem doing it. Street beggars. So here starts the camel dancing. And there's bands and there's music and there's bongo drums and horns and everything else. This guy, I've been there 2 times since. So he wins the best dressed camel competition every year. And like any entrepreneur, he's always trying to figure out how to increase attention to his camel. So he blew out the stops this year. He got some tall drink of water, good-looking young gal from Houston, Texas, is about 30 years old, to come and dress up a native costume and accompany him with his camel. Why, these Indian guys, you couldn't beat him off with a stick, you know, because most of your Indian guys are not very big. And they had to have their picture taken with it. And Nick came to me and he had this glazed look. Steve, come here, you got to see this. What's this? This is Stephanie. He says, "Isn't she beautiful?" I said, "Well, kind of, sort of, yeah." And but he had 2 Canadian gals, which were staying in the same hotel we were, and this from Houston, and he invited them. I don't know where he met them, but he invited them clear to the other side of the world to be part of this pushcar parade thing. And he had more people around that camel. You know, if the next camel had 10 people around, he had 250 people around. And they're all taking pictures of this big, tall girl from Houston, Texas, whose name was Stephanie. And the first one mesmerized was our guide, and I looked at that and I scratched my head and said, "Oh, this is comical. It's absolutely comical." John was very good at this. He had his long lens at the fair one day and took a lot of pictures of men. Had the same drummer all 3 years, letting the little boy play his drum. Very typical of the costumes. This little girl, I don't know how old she is here, I'm guessing 10. And we saw her 2019, she must have been about 15. But she does the high wire, and her mother collects the money. And they're getting ready for the horse dancing. This was an opening ceremony, which is another reason John and I were out killing ourselves trying to get pictures of these kids. Just like a high school marching dancing group. And after all that, they all went over and sat down in the bleachers, and you could walk right up to them and take their picture. And finally we learned to drill. As many of you ladies know, this is Hannah. And this is a thing, it's an Indian tradition. I think it's caught on over here in the States sometime in the last 10 or 20 years. They paint themselves up, and this can be a fair like this, or a religious holiday, or a wedding, or anniversary, or graduation, or whatever. And I know when I got back, I must have had 3 or 4 ladies I know in their 30s say, "Why didn't you bring a quart of that stuff home, you know? You were all the way over there, you could have brought us some." But the kids are just the same as kids are all over the world. Here's 3 girls primping their hair in a car mirror, you know. That could be at City High. But they're dressed to the nines, the kids, and they'll wear these same costumes, you know, to weddings and anything you can think of. But 99.9% of the time, they're dressed like normal people. One of the funniest comments, I was talking earlier to some folks, but I went down to the Hills Catholic Church, and they have a lunch once a year, about 100 women. And some way or another, they got me for dessert. They wanted me to come do this Indian thing. So I said, okay, I'll do that. I went down and met Father Mike. He's a character. And so when it got to the Q&A, one of the best questions I had, one of the ladies raised her hand and said, "Say, you know, looking at these pictures of these Indian people, you know, the women really look pretty good. You know, they're all dressed up, their hair's done, and everything else." She says, "But the men," she said, "boy, these men look a little rough to me, you know." And she's talking about them. I says, "Well," I said, "tell you what, that's one of these things that's the same everywhere in the world." I said, "If you go down to 218 Tappan Hills and walk in there at noon and start looking around, you're going to find out all the women are dressed up pretty well. They got their hair done, everything else. The men, you know, the cowhands and the labor force and so forth, they're a little rough around the edges when you look at them." They all roared laughing because it's funny that she took up on that right away. I didn't think these guys looked too bad, you know, but she thought they looked pretty rough. But I figured these must be sisters or something, or mother-daughter. Gowns made out of the same material. A lot of smoking goes on there.
How do they make their costumes?
Well,
They have sewing machines and
I have no idea. I know I was gonna do it, and then we got off track. I can't remember why. I was gonna go and decided not to. Nick had this good, but there's a massive textile industry within, out in this whole region where they dye fabric. And you go into some of those, and I mean, you'd spend a week in there taking pictures. It's just unbelievable. So they have the fabric. They have all the raw materials. Now, how they sew them, I don't know, but I imagine by hand. I would imagine by hand. You know, I'm sure these camel guys are, you know, thin with the dollar over there. They don't have much. Then you've always got the crowd that's out wanting their picture taken. So you see a lot of this. Here's a whole family hawking for money, and the little guy will dance and sing, and then they put the money basket out for money. The word that always comes out of these little girls, picture, picture, picture. Okay, because they know that the photographers are there. Here's a couple up in years in town trying to figure out, no, go this way, no, it's that way, no, Harry, it's on the left. Here's another camel that's not too happy. And they've got all kinds. Okay, this lady is on her way to pick up camel dung. Camels put out a product that's about the size of a baseball or a tennis ball. And it's round. It's got a lot of fiber in it. And they dry it, and that's what they cook with. It burns just like a charcoal briquette, except a lot quicker. So here we are at these horses are a special breed of Arabian that are bred specifically for desert travel. They're quite small, and their ears point in up on top. And what's a Kentucky place down in Lexington? No, the horse, it's the horse ranch or the horse, what is it called? At any rate, they've got a big museum on horses down there, and I asked them, I said, you ever see one of these horses? They said, yeah, somebody brings one every summer. I said, one. They said, one. That's where all of our Kentucky Derby horses are buried and everything else. I can't remember the name of it. But these horses will do things that my friends in Clonis say you couldn't get a horse to do that in Clona, Iowa. But again, there's bands, there's singing. This was my first year, so I didn't do videos. The later years, I've got videos of some of this, which brings it to life. But it's just a bunch of drum beating and horns and people cheering and yelling. This guy wins every year. He's having a little chalk talk with his horse before they get started. But the horse was very good, and he's very good. Here's another thing the horses in Kelowna won't do. They won't get on a trampoline and jump. Yeah, those charcoal are the dung, and the white is the bread. Not sure I'd want to butter one of those up. Coffee maker, he's there every year you go. Okay, here we are. This is the beginning of the mustache competition. These boys are signing in, and we didn't know anything about what a mustache competition was. But we figured it out pretty quick. And here's a guy, he brought that so he could, as he unfurled his mustache, he wouldn't get it dirty in the sand. He wanted to put it down on the carpet. And as soon as Ron and I saw that, we said, well, there he is. That's a grand champion right there. No question that guy's going to win the competition. And he did not win the competition. Here they are eyeing one another up, sizing one another up before the competition starts. And this is a guy that ultimately won it. Nope, this guy, this guy. And he won it because he was a showman. He jumped out there, and I don't know what he was saying, but he was dancing around and singing and laughing and engaging the crowd, and he had the whole place roaring. I think he won as much with his showmanship as he did with his mustache, because it didn't seem like it was anything that spectacular compared to the guy behind him that's carrying it like it's a rope. There he is. And this is different shots around town. They really do a lot of camel decorating for this fair. You know, a salesman is a salesman is a salesman. You know, this is like a car salesman. Look at this fine udder on this animal. This cow gives out so much milk a day or whatever, and he's hard selling. They're going back and forth, and the guy's got money in his hand, and you know, they're going. It's fun to watch him. Nice set of ladies. They were out picking up cow dung or camel dung. So I stopped and took a picture of them. Another thing about India, the median income there when we were there is about $2,000 a year. And I'm talking about the country and not Delhi. I've never seen such a happy bunch of people in my life. They're all smiling, all pleasant, all having a good time. diddles for the camels. There's a full load of dung. They dry it. It'll be dried for 2 or 3 days, and then they go around and sell it to anybody that needs it. Here's a guy on his cell phone. There's part of the $2,000 a year budget showing up. None of the kids wear diapers. And so I turned to Nick and I said, well, how's that work? He said, what do you mean? I said, well, what do you do when you go to church? And he said, you better know your child. Because, you know, if he starts squirming, you better get him outside because there's no backup. So, you know, and they are always sniffling, the Indians, because they don't use Kleenex. You've never heard so much sniffling in your life. Scenes around town. Then we decided to do some more sunset stuff. There's a little guy, no diapers on. Same deal. There's one of those Arabian-looking horses. To my knowledge, there's no horse competition, but there's a lot of horses around. I'm sure there's a lot of buying and selling of horses goes on at this too. Okay, in addition to camel dung, which they use a lot, they also make cow patties. So these are cow patties that are used for cooking. And yeah, I don't know on the farm if it had ever occurred to me to make a patty out of a cow pie, but that's what they do over there. Everything gets used. That's Mom on the right. She wanted me to take a picture of the 3 daughters and that baby. And boy, that costs you a lot of money. You've heard about animals wandering down the streets of India, and this is Pushkar's no exception. There's this guy told John, get over there next to him. I want to take your picture. No, I'm not going to do that, Johnson. I don't want anywhere near that guy. They're selling everything. Like that picture. So John says, hey Steve, you want to do a hot air balloon thing? I said, no. He said, well, you did that in Africa. I said, well, Africa's Africa and India's India. He said, why not? I said, well, you do realize we're about 50 miles from the Pakistan border. I'm not sure I want to end up in Pakistan. This guy doesn't know how to navigate the ship. He laughed. He said, okay. I don't think he really wanted to go anyway. We thought of putting Ron Stutzman on one and seeing how it worked out, but we decided not to do that. Here, that was solid camels. The third or fourth day of the show, and by the time the whole thing is moving out, this is a tail end of the show. This one I got a kick out of. So these guys are photographing this guy, and they're all French, and they're standing around talking, and John and Ron approached, and the guy more or less said, get the hell out of here, you know, this is a private deal. And so I didn't pay attention to him. Ron said, how come you didn't move? I said, well, I acted like I didn't understand French or English, either one. I just stood there. And I got this, one of my favorite pictures. And they're photographing him for some ad.
What's in the turban?
Nothing. They just wrap it around and around and around and around. It's just sort of a head covering. And I couldn't figure out for sure if this was for a French toothpaste ad. Possibly. I just couldn't figure out why they were taking this guy's picture. And he's been there every year, and he's a strikingly good-looking elderly man, and they just like taking his picture. So he gets his picture taken. 32 temples in town, and there's a lot of people come to bathe in the lake. This is a lake where the you wash your sins away. And if you go down at night or early morning, that whole thing is surrounded with people, you know, body to body, clear out into the water. There's some guy, couldn't figure out who he was. Sort of looks like he's related to the Lord himself, you know, when you look at him. This is a funny scene for those that know Ron, and this is a lot better story for the Hills Lady group than this group. But at any rate, Ron's walking down the street, and Ron and John are walking down the street. And I didn't go on this junket, and Nick's girlfriend was ferrying him around town, and they're walking along, and Ron says to the young lady, "Hey, what the heck's that? What's that all about?" And the young lady said, "Listen, in India, this is very common in India. If men are good friends, they hold hands all the time, and they walk down the street together, and it's just done here all the time, just normal Indian male friendship deal, India." So John, the professor, sticks his hand out to Ron. He says, "Ron, I guess you and I can hold hands then." Ron says, "Get the heck out of here." You would have no part of that. At any rate, a funny story. We're having coffee one day, and a parade erupted in the middle of town and came through with all these kids on floats and stuff. It's quite the celebration. More scenes around the fair. Ron considers himself a cattleman, and boy, he wasn't very impressed with the cattle that he saw over there. And get in there, I got a picture of you and this cow. That's one of my favorite shots. This is, you know, people ask me on traveling around the world, you know, what it's like, and I say, well, you know, people are pretty much the same all over the world. They really are. You know, they grow up in families. Many of them marry. They have relatives. They have aunts, uncles, grandpas, grandmas, the whole 9 yards, same way we do. I think they all care about their kids and want them to get educated and have a better life and everything else. So that part of the world is the same. And I said this could be Hills, Iowa. The only thing, when you go down to Casey's and Hills, nobody's got turbans on and nobody looks like that, but they're all down there coffee clutching, having their morning coffee, sitting around solving the problems of the world. But I said, what's different is governments and laws. I said, you better know the difference, because there are some very significant differences as you travel around the world in laws and governments and the way society is, the way they try and organize society, would be a better way to put it. But the people are just people everywhere in the world. Yeah, let's see. Oh, we went for a sundown photo shoot. We rented a camel, and this is a funny story. So here they had to be Americans, the Japanese contingency, and they had contracted with a gypsy to bring a bunch of gypsy dancers so that they could photograph them at sundown. Well, being a gypsy, you know, so these Japanese people show up and they set up camp, and he's welcoming in the crowd. You know, he's got his hat out. He's running around collecting money from these people. And this Japanese gal that's running this thing, she gets mad as all get out. She's mad as a hornet about it. Well, wait a minute, get these people out of here. This is a private deal, you know. And well, there was just no. This is India, you know. There's no control in anything in India. So it turned out to just be comical. And so Nick said, he said, they're in the wrong place. So we walked down the sand dune right below them. They were probably up in the air about, I don't know, 20 feet from us. And we were in the sand dune below, again in the thorny bushes, laying there waiting for the sun to go down so we could photograph these dancers. And the whole thing, though, was really comical. So here comes sunset, and we're getting these shots because we're in the right spot, and Nick's a photographer. And the Japanese guys they're up on top shooting this way, and they can't get the shots. But Nick knew where to put us, and when to put us, and where to put us, and these are the shots we got. So if you didn't mind the thorns and laying in the sand and crawling around, there's John. These are some sundown shots. And I might add, this was my idea to put the boy in the picture. Nick said, no, and he's good at ordering people around, believe me, our Indian guide. And I said, no, leave the boy in. And that turned out, Nick even told me later, he says, that was a good idea, leave the boy in that picture. And so at any rate, that's the end of it. We went on to Ranthambore, which is a Bengal tiger park. And we went on to the Agra to Taj Mahal. And then from there we flew back to the States, about a 14-hour trip. So that's fundamentally India. I've been back 3 times since. The later trips, the photography and the videos get better, but I'm not so well organized on them yet. And I organized around the first trip, but I thought you could enjoy it. And John and I have done a lot of Africa. We got a lot of African wildlife pictures and bird pictures, and we've also done polar bears. And I get called on from time to time to do polar bear stuff or African stuff as well. But we enjoyed India, and we have a great relationship with Nick, our guide, and we stay in contact with him constantly. But if you go to India or you go anywhere in the world, as many of you know from your travels, you want somebody to meet you at that airplane, they take you wherever you're going, and they want to put you back on the airplane when you go home. And in India, that's absolutely necessary. Otherwise, you'd be like some person landing in Chicago for the first time, didn't speak English, and they decide, well, let's see, I'll take public transportation to the south side of Chicago and see how that goes down. And you just don't do that on these foreign trips. You have somebody organized to guide you through the whole thing. So that's first blush at India. Any questions?
How did you find the guide?
That's a great question. So I didn't know how to go about that, so I went online and I poked around and so forth. And finally I found this guy, and I looked at his website, and he'll do 1 person, 5 person, 10 people. He'll do whatever you want to do. You don't have to be part of a group or anything else. So I said, well, that's my guy, and I don't know if I knew then how accomplished a photographer, but Nick's done books on Bengal tigers, he's done books on birds. He's really a very, very accomplished photographer. But before we mailed that check off from Hills, John and Ron and I, for $3,000 or $4,000 or whatever the deposit was. So I told Nick, I said, in God we trust, everybody else has to have references. So you got any references? And he said, yeah, this guy, I wish I could remember his name. I think it's Conrad, something or another. So I said, okay, fine, thanks. And so I called this guy up, and he's sort of a cowboy type guy, single guy from Wyoming, And I'm talking to him. I said, you been over there with Nick? Yeah, several times. I said, he's reliable? Yeah. What about mailing deposits? Yeah, I always mail a deposit. I said, do you ever worry about that? He said, no. Well, he's a cowboy, honest to God, I wouldn't mail off a check like that. So at any rate, he said, yeah, you might want to go check my website out. And so he gave me the name of his website, and I went on there. This guy, this cowboy from Wyoming, has produced probably 25% of the field and stream covers. I mean, he is a world-class photographer, just world-class. But he had me scared to death about India. Oh, the food is terrible. He said, no more trains. I hate those Indian trains. And he's going on and on. He said, the food is just terrible. He said, the smell over there is terrible. You get off the plane. He said, he's going on and on. I didn't have any of that. Maybe it's because I grew up on a farm or something, but where we went in India, the corner of India we go into, they're not into curry or hot anything. They just have fundamentally a lot of the salads were out of this world. They say don't eat any vegetables or all that stuff. It was the contrary. The salads were some of the best in the world. And a vast variety of them, and the breakfasts were unbelievably good. And they eat a lot of bread over there. But that's how I found Nick, online, the reference. Then we sent the check. Then we went over, and we've used him, I think, 3 or 4 times. And he's a great guy. He's a little rough around the edges when it comes to social skills. You know, he's all right. So John and I, Nick, were having breakfast one time, and he said something about the slotted canyons. And Nick said, well, I'd really like to see the slotted canyons. How many have seen those in Arizona, slotted canyons? That was on my list of things I had to see in life. So we decided, all right, we'll do it. And John said, well, it'd be great if we had Nick fly over, and we'll drive him all the way to Arizona so he can see the countryside, and we'll go to the slotted canyons. So we planned that trip over there, and that was quite a time. But that same time, and Nick, you know, I know how to use 10% of Photoshop. Nick knows how to use 90% of Photoshop. So John and I would just, every time we were with him, you know, we'd sit down, hey, we gotta have a session. You know, go off in somebody's room and everybody get their laptops out, and he can show you, because the instruction books on these are impossible. They are just maddening to try and read them and figure out how to do something. But Nick knows how to navigate all this. And John's a lot more proficient than I am, but we're probably at the 20% level now of knowing how to use Photoshop. And you can do a lot with photographers with Photoshop by cropping and turning the light on and turning the light off and so forth. But so that's how we found Nick, and his reference was funny, you know, really. If I was just worried mainly about him being reliable in the money, but Nick is very reliable. But he gets up like a straw boss in the mornings, trying to order everybody out and, you know, get them all herded in and going in the same direction. And the groups aren't that big, but he's you wouldn't want to be in. I wouldn't want to be in India where we went in India without him, because he'll, you know, you're walking down. I'll get one more war story. So Nick, the first trip, showed us some stuff we didn't care to see. So he said, well, you got to see this mosque. He said, it's the oldest mosque in the United States, and it's inside it's in Ajmer, the town the train was on. Well, what he didn't have to tell us, we had to take a donkey cart and everything else. It only go about a third of the way up the hill, and then we had to walk up the hill 1.5 miles. And he almost had to beat off beggars with a stick. You know, I mean, it was rough not rough neighborhood, just annoying, you know. We get up there, we have to check our shoes. We have to take our shoes off and check them with some people. I said, I hope we see those again. So Ron and John, we had no idea what was going on here, except Nick said we had to do this. And there's a tomb in there, or whatever they call it, and that thing was about the size of this room, and there was one door over there, and there was one door over there. And Nick said, I got flowers. He said, okay, fine. So he gets a plate of flowers. What's that for? Well, if you buy a plate of flowers and you have a kid go in there and he drags you through that crowd, I mean, you were in there like this with people jostling you all around. Kid's got you by the belt, and he's pulling you over, and we're in there. Ron's testimony, I tell you, he came out the other side. He was like a chicken had been put in a bucket of water. He was really. So at any rate, Nick and John and I and the kids, they drug us up to this altar or whatever it was in front of this, whoever was buried there. They threw a blanket over our head, and they were shouting all this stuff and everything else. So at any rate, we said, well, where'd Ron go? So he said, well, he got flushed out to sea over there in the corner. You know, he didn't buy his deal of flowers. You know. We get outside. Ron sat there, and he said, and if that isn't bad enough, then there's a guy with a bucket of money on the way out. Want more money? He says that. And so Nick comes out. We're all sort of got a kick out of it. John and I, you know, we roll with the punches, and we got a kick out of it. And Rod's standing there, and there's another line lining up to come in a side door that they'd opened up. Rod says, we're not going in there again. Nick says, no, once is enough. But, oh, that was so funny, because it was just chaos, absolute chaos from the time you went through the door. I bet this room was rated for 140 people. There were 1,400 people in that room. I mean, you were just shoved back and forth going in there, and we didn't have any idea what was going on. But the next time we went, we said, we're going to bypass that mosque. We're not going to do that. All right. It's funny because he's a very religious guy. And the
About their cameras, a friend of mine over back in the Cleveland area is a nature photographer,
Mhm.
and she was hired by Leica
Yep.
to test their cameras
Yep.
in Antarctica.
Yep.
So she and her husband went down to Antarctica to photograph
Yep.
penguins,
Yep.
king penguins,
Yep.
and so forth. And they camped out in a tent on the ice at 40 below zero. And I said, geez, friend, how did you do the necessities? And she said, very quickly.
Yeah. John's been there a number of times. This John right here. He won the state fair photo competition with 3 penguins at the Arctic Circle. And as soon as I saw the picture, it's 3 penguins, and you would swear that they were NFL referees at the 50-yard line having a conference, these 3 penguins. And the ocean is in the background, and there's mountains. And those penguins, I can't remember what they're called. I think they're emperor. Yeah, the 4-foot ones. And I asked John, I said, John, where were you when you took the photograph? Because I could tell from that photograph, he again would have been on his belly or somewhere, you know, and these penguins, you know, they leave droppings everywhere. And he says, I knew you were going to ask me that question, because he's a farm boy. He said, I had taken plastic along, and I laid it down. He said, I was laying down on my side shooting that photo. It is an absolute spectacular photograph. And yeah. And he went through that. But if it was minus 40, she was down there in the wintertime then. And John always goes down in the summertime. There's a narrow window when you can go down there. But his last trip to Antarctica, there's a lady, I wish I could remember her name. And John said, you know, we'd come in at the end of the day and look at photographs, and very typical on these photo type deals like that. You go in here, everybody's into photography, so at the end of the day, you get your laptops and you all sit there and show your better pictures of what you got and so forth. And he said, this is John, he said, this lady, he said, she was kicking my ass. He said, her photography was just, he said, it just blew me away. He said, I've never seen anything like that in my life. He said, then I started talking to her and found out she is world-renowned polar bear and Arctic Circle photographer, and she sells pictures all over the world. Her stuff is, I wish I had her name because you can go online and see her stuff, but she goes up with the polar bears when the cubs come out and it's minus 40 degrees, and she'll do that for like 10 days or 12 days waiting for these cubs to come out of the dens in the same kind of weather. And I mean, you got to be a trooper to want to go up there and do that kind of stuff. And she does a lot of Arctic, but her photography is just unbelievable, just unbelievable. John's isn't too bad. So that's how I found him. Any other questions?
Thank you.
You betcha. You bet. Enjoyed it.